Hey guys, so today we'll be learning about the poem My Mother at 66. This is basically a holistic view of everything that we're going to learn today. And I know that it seems a lot, but we'll go through each line step by step. And hopefully you leave this video with something more than when you came. Alright, so let's get into it. This poem was written in the 20th century by Kamala Das. This para is not that important from an exam perspective, except a few keywords, which I'll highlight. So let's read together. Kamala Das was born in Malabar, Kerala. She is recognized as one of India's foremost poets. Her works are known for their originality, versatility, and indigenous flavor of the soil. You could use these as filler words and sentences in your answers if it's a big 5 marker or 10 marker. Kamala Das has published many novels and short stories in English and Malayalam under the name Madhavi Kutti. This is an important keyword, so remember it and also focus on the spelling more because sometimes they'll ask you this in MCQs and change the spellings. She is a sensitive writer who captures the complex subtleties of human relationship in lyrical idiom. My Mother at 66 is an example. So this right here is also a very important sentence. You can use this to answer questions when they ask you about the poet and what the poem is about. So these are the keywords: sensitive writer, complex subtleties of human relationships. And also it's mentioned that this poem is a lyrical idiom. So an idiom is basically a phrase with a figurative meaning, which is different from the literal meaning of its individual words. For example, break a leg or over the moon. So again, an important keyword, the poet is a lyrical idiom. Coming to the poem itself now, I'll first read through the stanza and then give you explanation for it. Driving from my parents' home to Cochin last Friday morning, I saw my mother beside me. Dozed, open-mouthed, her face ashen like that of a corpse, and realized with pain that she was as old as she looked. Now from this para, we can make out that the poet and her mother is in a car. She's driving from her parents' home, which is in Cochin. This is an important keyword. They can ask where her parents' house is. Dozed, open-mouthed, and her face ashen like that of a corpse. Here the poet has used the poetic device called simile between face and corpse. A simile is basically a direct comparison between two words. So the poet is comparing her mother's face with that of a corpse. Here doze basically means dozed off. From here till here, these are observations that the poet is making about her mother, and these are all painful realizations. You can use these exact words while answering the paper. So that's the basic explanation for stanza 1. Now before we move to stanza 2, I just want to summarize stanza 1 again. So in a small gist, stanza 1 basically talks about the pain and anguish felt by the poet on seeing her aging mother sitting in the car. They are on their way to the airport. Her mother is dozing, her mouth is open, and it's basically ashen, lifeless like that of a corpse. The poet is in dismay and it's triggering her childhood fear. Now moving on to stanza 2. She was as old as she looked, but soon put that thought away and looked out at young trees sprinting, the merry children spinning out of their homes. This is a small stanza and there are basically two important things that you have to focus on here. First, a question can be asked as to what all things the poet is seeing outside the car. So over here, the first one is trees sprinting. Now here the poet has yet again used another poetic device called personification, where we assign inanimate objects with human-like qualities. Second, merry children spilling out of their homes. And third, we have to mention basically that whatever the poet is seeing outside the car is totally opposite to what's inside the car. Inside, it's about death, getting old, while outside, it's about being free, young. Stanza 2 in a gist is basically about escapism. The poet looks outside the car to put the dreadful thought away that her mother is getting old. There is a clear contrast between her mother's weakness and frailty and the blossoming life, young trees sprinting, racing past. It's a grim reminder of the lapse of time. Merry children spelling is basically new hope. It reminds us of happiness, youth. The poet over here is drifting back to a time where her mother was also young and energetic. But now, what she sees in front of her inside the car is basically a grim reminder of lost youth. Now moving on to para 3. But after the airport's security check, standing a few yards away, I looked again at her, worn pale, as a late winter's moon, and felt that old familiar ache, my childhood's fear. But all I said was, see you soon, Amma. All I did was smile and smile and smile. Here the poet is looking at her mother for the second time, and the poet has again used simile to draw a direct comparison between the worn pale face of the mother and the late winter's moon. Late here signifies the moon becoming pale and yellow and basically engulfed in fog. And winter here is basically used symbolic to time of death and decay. Now in the paper, if they ask you what is the poet's childhood fear, this is from where you can answer that question. In the last line of the poem, the poet uses repetition, which is also another poetic device, repeating smile again and again. This is to create more emphasis. The last line basically emphasizes the hope in the poet's mind about whether or not she'll see her mother the next time she comes over. Before I give you a gist of stanza 3, a cool fact that you might notice about the poem is that it's a single sentence punctuated by commas. This basically shows us that all that has happened so far has been like a train of thoughts inside the poet's mind. It's not something that has been refined over, it's just everything that came into her throughout that journey. Now coming to the gist of stanza 3, Here, the poet looks at the mother's face for a second time, and it's worn like a winter moon. It resembles foggy, misty, like an end of the cycle. She feels an old familiar ache from her childhood, a twitch in her heart, a fear of loss and separation from her mother. This fear seizes her. She's beset with sorrow, insecurity, agonizing thought of mother's impending death. She bids goodbye to her mother, hides her fear by smiling and telling, "See you soon, Amma." Hiding her own grief, she smiled and smiled and smiled again, giving herself assurance that she will see her mother soon. So that's basically it from the stanza perspective. Now I'll go into the theme. Coming to the theme of the poem, the theme is of inescapable decay, a pre-sentiment of emotional susceptibility leading to terrible fear of death, separation, isolation. The daughter's feelings and concern are portrayed in a sensitive manner. One of the many childhood fears that distressed her was the fear of her mother's death. You can use this word for word if you want while answering questions in your paper. And just as a small revision, the poetic devices that were used in this poem were simile, imagery, personification, and repetition. So that's it for today's video, guys. Hopefully you have a little bit more of an understanding about this poem than when you came. You can take a photo of this page if you want. This is basically everything I explained verbally in the video. If you guys just want to take a photo of this instead of making your own notes, that's completely fine. I'll just go over each page step by step so you guys can take a better screenshot. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching and peace.